In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. More than 60 years ago, not too many years more than 60, I was born into this world in these Twin Cities, and I was baptized into the Catholic Church. It was the 1950s, the latter part, and it was the Catholic Church that was still intact and was in continuity with the church that had existed for over 1900 years. By the time I reached the age of 12, a revolution had been taking place and was still ongoing and would continue for decades and continues to this day. It was and is a revolution that in many ways was in discontinuity with more than 1900 years of Catholic tradition. I was blessed in that those first 12 years of life are very formative, perhaps most formative of all of our lives, no matter how many years we live. And it was in that span of my first 12 years of life as a Catholic that I learned the Catholic faith from my parents especially, as the faith had always been taught and believed. And I became aware of a calling or vocation to the holy priesthood. I was blessed, in fact, that my parents were in the church choir in that time before the Revolution, and frankly, I fell in love with what we now call the traditional Mass. The music, the Mass, sacred and intact. Following those first 12 years, though, and I mentioned this in a previous sermon, so much changed. The interior of churches were radically changed. The form of the Mass was radically changed. The type of music at Mass was radically changed in many places. The way that the faith was taught and the content of the faith radically changed. Innovations were introduced in which we were asked to shake hands at Mass, and we were urged to receive Holy Communion in our hands. And in many churches, kneelers were stripped out, and there was no opportunity for the faithful to adore God in a kneeling posture, and so on and so on. And for 30 years after those formative years, it seemed like more and more of what I had known to be Catholicism in the first 12 years of my life seemed to be disappearing or changing in one manner or another. Until about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was reintroduced to traditional Catholicism. 20 years ago, in this church, I started offering the traditional form of the Mass, the Tridentine Mass. In those days, it was very restricted. This was the only church within this archdiocese allowed to publicly offer that Mass with the approval of the Archbishop. It was only allowed once a month on Friday evenings for First Friday devotion. There were very few in the state at all. And then some 15 years ago, I became pastor of what was then the two parishes and the two churches, and now we are one parish with the Tridentine form of the Mass offered daily at both churches. So 20 years ago, by the providence of God, I rediscovered Catholicism as I had known it growing up the first 12 years of my life. And having gone through a 30-year span where it seemed to have all but disappeared in many ways, it was a wonderful blessing to have rediscovered it. Each of you has your story related to traditional Catholicism, and the stories differ. Some of you are old enough and grew up in families that were rooted enough in Catholicism as it was known up until the end of the 50s, and never lost contact with Catholicism in its traditional form. You found ways and you found places in which you could continue to attend the Tridentine Mass and find the sacraments in their traditional form and instruct your children and be instructed in Catholicism as it had been known and taught through the centuries. Others of you may have had experience similar to mine, where you grew up to a certain age in traditional Catholicism, or simply Catholicism as was known, and then at some point subsequent to that, rediscovered Catholicism as it was known. For others, you're young enough that you never had that experience of growing up at all with traditional Catholicism and discovered it for the first time in some manner and in some place. Maybe it was by imitation of somebody else. Maybe it was by accident and providence that you ended up in this church. Whatever means it was, there are some here who discovered it for the first time. And there may be some here who are still unsure. You may be attending this Mass for the first time or only on occasion and still feel the awkwardness of something that seems so foreign relative to what you have experienced elsewhere. And I hope that you will continue to join us even more regularly. My point in all this is that we are a very large congregation, for which I am very grateful and blessed. And we come with a variety of experiences of Catholicism, traditional Catholicism. But the important thing is we have that in common. Whether you are relatively new to traditional Catholicism, or that is all you have ever known your entire life, or you rediscovered Catholicism by whatever means, that is what we have in common. And that is what unites us. And that is what is so important. And what is important then is that we not let other things unnecessarily divide us. The length of time for which one has been associated with traditional Catholicism, the means by which you came here, and so on, or other negotiable details. As an example, there was a very devout member of our congregation who for years argued with me that I should never say Saint Michael the Archangel, but Holy Angel, Holy Michael the Archangel. In his mind, that calling Saint Michael a saint was diminishing his nature as an angel. And so we for years discussed that, and I've not changed. And we still recite the prayer to Saint Michael, and he never left us until God called him. And so too, there are some differences of opinions as to maybe how long someone should fast before Mass. Should we follow the newer canon law or the older canon law? Or with regards to other negotiables, and so on. These things should not divide us, nor should, in the bigger picture, other ways in which Catholics who are drawn or rooted in traditional Catholicism be at odds unnecessarily with one another. In this archdiocese, there are at least 3, and probably more, ways in which in large numbers the faithful find traditional Catholicism. On the other side of the cities, there is a parish run by FSSP priests, the Fraternity of St. Peter. And many of you may attend there on occasion as well. And I fully support what the FSSP priests are doing. Not far from here, in St. Paul, is an SSPX parish, in which the faithful are living out traditional Catholicism this very day with one of their own pastors. I have a very good relationship with that pastor. I enjoy his company, and we agree on much more than we might disagree on. Then there is SSP, South St. Paul, here in this archdiocesan setting in which we have the Tridentine Mass and the range of the sacraments in their traditional form as well. And as time goes, there are more and more pastors and parishes offering at least some aspects of traditional Catholicism as well. My point in this is we should not be at odds with fellow Catholics and fellow organizations that all have a common vision insofar as we have embraced traditional Catholicism, that is Catholicism as it was known in centuries past. And while we might disagree about some specifics as to the resolution to the present crisis in the Church, we might disagree as to where we might worship and other circumstances along the lines, there is more that unites us than divides us. There's a movement in the web-based world, in fact, that some of you may see, and it's a relatively new movement, if you will, going under the hashtag Unite the Clans. That originated out of one of our own parishioners at the Remnant website, Unite the Clans, and it's catching on, and I'm glad to see that. Father Z, many of you may know of him, was a dear friend. We grew up only one block apart and have been steady friends for nearly 40 years. Father Z has picked up on this, as are other traditional websites and organizations as well. The expression Unite the Clans is based in an historical situation more recently made famous by a Mel Gibson movie known as Braveheart. Braveheart describes the historical situation going back about 800 years in which the English conquered the Scotland. And the Scots remained under their power and occupied by them for a length of time because they were not united. There were all these clans or family lines with royalty within their lines and nobility that all looked out for their own interest. But William Wallace, an historical figure, united the clans together, and by that unity were able to overthrow the yoke of the English and reclaim their freedom and independence. That is a visual way and an historical example of what should be happening among traditional Catholics. Rather than being divided clans, SSPX versus FSSP versus SSP versus whatever other identifier one chooses to go under, we can be united in our view of tradition and our deep, deep desire to see it restored throughout the Catholic Church. My experience with you for 20 years is that we are not divided. In small ways, we might have different opinions. As I noted, we come from different backgrounds and so on, but we are united, and that is our strength. It is the strength of the church, which is to be one, and it is the essence of God, that is unity. So let me encourage you to continue in this spirit of unity, joined together by tradition, and also if you find in your own family life or friend life there's a certain fragmentation outside of this community, I'd encourage you to reevaluate that in light of the fact that there is so much more that unites us than divides us, and it is the most important thing of all that does unite us, our common commitment to the restoration of traditional Catholicism in Holy Mother Church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the